Hello. How are we all doing? I think we're all getting seated in, so please come in and sit down. We've got two founders joining us today who've recently both raised their new funds. One's raised a bigger fund. Why don't we welcome Niki Scevak and Vince Allen from Blackbird and SunDrive. Why don't we do a pulse of the room to get us going, to just understand who we've got. So who's a founder? Put your hand up. Yeah, lots of founders at the back. Who's an investor? Yeah, lots of investors. Who's a student? Ooh, few students. Who's from corporate and wants to work in startups? Oh, we've got a fair few of those as well. Great. Everyone's emails are public, so reach out after this. I'm sure there's opportunities. Now, the talk today is called The Hungry, Not the Proven. I think when I think of that, I think of ambition. And Niki started Blackbird about 10 years ago, if I know correctly. And Niki, you talk a lot about ambition and Australia being more ambitious. Tell us about the source of your ambition. Where does it come from?
I would also maybe take a step back as people think of ambition as this static thing, like this, American founder beating their chest, saying that they'll be a billion-dollar company, right from the beginning. That being ambition versus, to me, ambition is something it's your reaction to success. So if something positive happens, what do you do after that positive thing happens? Do you re-raise your ambition? Do you generate 10 times new ideas? Or do you sort of say, yep, that's nice, let's keep going along and not react to positive news? So I think ambition in the best is this progressive, and the most exciting is when it's exponentially sort of increasing as each step of the journey is taken. My ambition, I would say there is no greater joy in the hungry, not the proven, the unimportant person becoming an important person. I'm sure there's parents in the room, and it's that sense of pride you get when you see your kids develop and kids succeed, and it's a diluted version of that, but I think the investor relationship or the joy of the job that I get is seeing that person develop and sort of unhatch along the way to react to all of those positive developments with ambition and re-raising of their own ambition. And so that's the joy of the job. I could do that every single day. And there's also there's a guy, Tyler Cohen, who's an economist at George Mason University, but he has, you should look him up, also runs an interesting podcast. And he said, in someone's life, when you believe in them, when you believe in someone at a key moment of their life, and the reaction to that belief lifts them up and puts them on that trajectory, that is the joy. And so, to me, the joy of the job is helping nurture that ambition, helping push them to re-raise at each positive step of the way. And I could do that every day of my life.
Mm. Now, a lot of founders are in the room and they are thinking about their nervous first meeting with the investor, or investors thinking about their nervous first meeting with the founder. Vince, you had your first meeting, I believe, with Niki a while back. And take us inside that first meeting. When was it? How did it happen? What did you talk about?
Yeah, so this was 2017. So I was introduced to Niki through the UNSW entrepreneurship team. And more specifically, Elizabeth Eastland, who was the director of entrepreneurship at UNSW at the time. But I guess I just sort of really recall the first meeting being, a conversation, not a presentation. There was no, weird dynamic of, standing up behind some slides, going through the presentation, talking down at Niki, who I'd just met. So, there was none of that. It was just really just focusing or trying to articulate the problem and the problem that we're trying to solve and how we think we can solve it. So yeah, that and I think towards the end of the at the end of the meeting, I think Niki had more curiosity or wanted to learn more about what we were doing than before the meeting. And then that obviously led to the second meeting, et cetera, et cetera.
And how many meetings did you have before Niki gave you that term sheet?
So there would have been, there's obviously a lot of conversation, a lot of engagements. So there was also, a partner meeting, so, a more formal presentation to all the Blackbird partners. The team from Blackbird came down and visited our very basic lab set up at the time, just pretty much a tent that we bought from Bunnings for $200. We were making tiny little lab-sized cells with an unknown efficiency. And yeah, I wasn't really sure what Niki and Rick and Sam, were going to think about the setup that we had. But yeah, they were very, very interested and wanted to learn more, and it just sort of progressed from one meeting to the next meeting. And I'd probably say sort of pretty quick, actually. Blackbird were very responsive. I'd probably say 6 weeks from really that first engagement to getting a yes or a no. And that's something as a founder, I deeply respect. Not to be sort of left in the limbo for an extended amount of time.
Niki, I think the aspect there that people might wonder is Vince was a uni student. He's meeting you. You've got more career experience. You're older. He might be in shorts and a t-shirt. You might be in shorts and a t-shirt too, but you've got this experience. And a lot of founders that I speak to tell me that you made them feel really comfortable in that first meeting. Tell us about that. Like, how do you make a uni student feel comfortable in that first meeting?
So I think sort of the traditional view of the investor pitch is Dragon's Den or Shark Tank, where you have these expert on one side of the table, and then you have sort of this nervous person enter the room and get shot down with questions and goes back and forth and kind of survives, and then all of a sudden one of the investors has the gotcha moment, and then, like that dynamic is just gross, and it's just not how the world works as well. I think also, like when Vince mentioned the Bunnings tent, the Bunnings tent was in the investment memo as one of the positives of the story. I think stepping back, who are the successful people in the world? If you look at all of the trillion-dollar companies, they were started by people who just finished university or didn't finish university in the case of Microsoft and Facebook. So the fact that Vince was a university student, wow, that's like pretty awesome. He's in the highest percentage category of trillion-dollar founders from that point of view. And then also just there are so many people in the world with good ideas, and maybe 1% of them take the good idea and actually go and do something with it. Go and build the first iteration of SunDrive in the garage. Go and build the first, take the second step of the Bunnings tent in the Wollongong warehouse. And so all of these are dreams for an investor to come across this fresh thinking, this original idea. The changing, solar is not going to succeed unless we stop using silver. Solar is not going to get cheaper if it still relies on silver, and just these charismatic ideas. That was the ding, ding, ding. We have a saying around Blackbird called the hospitality mindset. We designed our office like a cafe, so people would feel welcome when they came in. They didn't feel, another value of Blackbird is we wear t-shirts. We don't want to do the Dragon's Den, gotcha vibe to the pitch meeting. And there was a great definition of hospitality, which is you feel the other person is on your side, and everything we do at Blackbird in trying to create that experience to make sure that that person feels that we're on their side, because that's when you get into the great conversations. That's when you get into the opposite of that adversarial conversation. So I'd say that's how we've tried to build Blackbird. That's how we try to design everything from the physical space to the way that we structure the conversations to welcome that and to get the best out of it.
I want to get to your working relationship in a second, but Niki, just to stay on that point and bringing it back to ambition, one of the other things I hear from a lot of founders who you said yes to, but also founders you've said no to, you've maintained this humility, even though you've now got $1 billion fund. And I think the joke on the street is, oh, how do we get a hold of Niki? But I think in our interactions, even though I'm not raising money from you, you've been really easy to access. Niki always replies to my emails within 48 hours. And I've never got any responses, even sometimes my parents don't reply in 48 hours. And I think you've replied every time with a detailed response within 48 hours. So I think kudos to you for that. But how do you keep that humility and that feet in the ground as you achieve your ambition in a way?
I could say it's a pretty embarrassing business. So it's hard not to be have that humility when most of the decisions that we make at Blackbird will be bad investment decisions. We will not get our money back, or we will get nothing back. And we actually want to strive to do that more than 1 and 2 times. We want to push ourselves. I think if we don't fail enough, it means we're not taking enough risk. And so to push ourselves to fail most of the time. So if you fail most of the time, it's pretty embarrassing. It's the retirement savings of Australians and New Zealanders, and we've invested in the company and it hasn't worked out. We invested in a Dogecoin company in 2014, and we got $0 back. And not only that, if we would have just put that money into Dogecoin, we would have made like 1,000 times our money. So it's hard not to make money from Dogecoin, but we found a way to do that. We have had the chance to invest in iconic companies and screwed it up right at the beginning. Another story is the first Sunrise we ran in CarriageWorks in 2014. I think Jack from Airwallex emailed me after the Sunrise, oh my God, this is my people. This is an amazing event. Can we catch up? And I was like, oh, don't want to waste your time. We don't invest in fintech. And he's like, just let me tell you the story. Is like, spend your fundraising time. And so passing on Airwallex in the seed round, he came along to the Sunrise. He experienced the Blackbird values, and I didn't even take the chance to meet him. That keeps you humble every day. And then just also, I think the creation of a company. It's such a messy, chaotic process, and people you go to university and you get like the sanitized version of like, you start here and then you discover something and it sounds so neat and tidy versus the chaos or the things don't work out before they do work out. And I just knowing that, how difficult it is, how stacked against the odds are. To me, you can't help but not be have that humility to it.
Are you in the room, Jack? Put your hand up. Maybe not. Vince, let's talk about the operational aspects of the relationship. And I think one thing that I hear from founders and investors is the relationship's built on a commercial agreement, but actually is very personal. Mm-hmm. It's a human relationship. Can you share a story or an example of how Niki's helped you in an unexpected way?
Yeah, so I mean, it definitely is both it is a commercial relationship and it is a personal relationship. I mean, it's commercial in a sense that, when you do take on capital, there definitely is expectations. There are, commitments that need to be made to meet deliverables. But yeah, it is important at the same time to have that sort of human or more, personal, relationship because, being a founder, starting a company is tough, is challenging, and there's so many decisions that need to be made, and some of them can have a very severe negative consequence on the startup. So yeah, having people like Niki, is a massive support for us. There's many things that Niki and the rest of our board and our advisors help us with. Recruitment, fundraising, scaling up our operations. Strategy, but I guess in terms of something specific that I guess we were very unprepared for, and I think a lot of companies were, is just to do with COVID and how to deal with that, and more specifically being a hardware company. It's very difficult to make solar cells with a remote team, so we had to rewrite our work policies, work procedures, COVID measures, all of that kind of stuff. So that was quite difficult to navigate. So that's something that Niki really helped with, and even to do with COVID. And I think this also speaks of Blackbird's conviction So we raised our pre-Series A in 2020, and it was basically a couple of weeks after the March 2020 crash. And at that time, if you guys remember, there was basically massive chaos in the markets. No one really knew the extent of COVID and what it really meant. There were no vaccines at that time, but we got through that, and Niki was a key part in enabling that.
Any unexpected memories, Niki, to date that stick out in this relationship?
Usually founders say they're going to do X, Y, and Z, and they'll say that the forecast is conservative. And I can say from the sample size of thousands of we'll do X, Y, Z, and our forecast is conservative. It's not conservative, and it tends to be overestimated or greatly exaggerated. And the striking thing with Vince at every step of the journey, from the very first round that we invested into, more as SunDrive grows up into a manufacturing culture of bringing that product to market, is everything that Vince said. His seed round, he has a great sort of clarifying mind to break a unit of progress down into 3 different goals and say, here are the goals, here's how we're going to achieve them, here's the timeline, here's what goes into them. And we look back in every unit of capital, it's like amazing that every single time what he said he would do, they did on time, which again doesn't happen often in the investing world.
One thing people might not know about you, Vince, is you're a PhD student. We just said student, but you're a PhD student.
Yep.
And I understand you put that on pause and you decided to start a company. We've got a bunch of students in the room based on the quick survey earlier. How did you come to that conclusion? Tell us, now you've got benefit of hindsight, is anything that sticks out for you that you wish you'd done when you were leaving academia to start a business?
Sure. So I was doing a PhD at UNSW. So for those that don't know, basically UNSW invented today's commercial solar cells. And I guess I started my PhD on a project working on a type of solar cell that we thought could be the next generation. And sort of within 6 to 12 months of the PhD, it became quite apparent that in order to accelerate the progress, I needed some new equipment that the university didn't have at the time. So obviously I was left with a choice. Do I continue trying to do what I'm doing through the university, which would have been a much longer process? I mean, designing equipment, sending designs away. Like, the equipment comes back, a lot of the time there's problems with it, you've got to send it back, etc., back and forth, and you need to find a space in the lab at uni. Or the other option, which is what ended up happening, is we basically just started designing and building our own equipment in my garage together with my co-founder Dave. And it was super basic at the time, but what it allowed us to do is iterate much, much faster than what we would have through the university. So and it just sort of became clear that maybe there's actually something here where we can keep working on it sort of outside the university. And obviously to do that, need to set up a company, need to raise investment, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it was just sort of quite a natural kind of evolution in terms of the decisions that were made. When I first started uni and doing solar engineering, like, I never went into it with the intent to start a company one day. It was just, starting a company is the quickest way I think I can make some sort of contribution to what we're working on and what we're trying to do.
Niki, maybe the investor perspective in this, and I think on the High Flyers podcast, you talked about how if you've got an idea, just go with it. Don't spend time in uni, I think were your words, if I remember correctly. I wish I knew that when I did uni, and I wasted 4 years of my life. But how do you speak to young founders, whether they're in their 20s or later, and if they come to you with an idea, but they're at uni, similar to Vince was, is that something you talk to them about, or do you just back the idea and the founder?
Talk to them as in...
As in about the fact that they're at uni, if you invest, they've got to decide if they'll leave university or go full-time on the business. I think there's different opinions on that, but back to ambition and conviction, how do you build that with someone who's at uni?
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's two investment decisions. There's the founder equity, where someone has chosen to invest their life, their time, and then there's the investor decision, which is investing capital and so on. So to me, there is that first decision, and I think if there's a doubt, I mean, if there's any doubt, then they shouldn't leave university. But and I would never tell someone to, hey, leave university to do a company. I think it's at a higher level. It's just you can't stop thinking of the idea. You have this impatience around making progress on the mission of the company, and it's an afterthought on am I full-time university, so on and so forth. So I think to me, even doing a startup, like don't do a startup because of the startups, like, to do a startup. Like, create a mission where the vehicle for that is the company. It could have been through the university, it could have been through the company, but the important thing was the mission, and the important thing was the idea, not the vehicle.
So I might just add, so I actually already put my PhD on hold when chatting with Niki. So it's not like that. It's not like that was a decision. I don't think.
And this is before you met Niki.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So it's not like Niki was assessing, whether I'm doing a PhD or not. I already had decided at that point to put the PhD on hold, commit 100% to SunDrive, because again, I just thought, it's a much bigger opportunity, and I can, from a personal level, I thought I could make a bigger contribution to what we're doing through a company.
Another aspect that I think founders often wonder, Vince, is how do you get that investment, but then build a team around it and scale a product? And I think you've done that really well. Do you want to talk to some of your learnings there around, again, coming from academia into a very practical industry, which has got different actors involved and different
Definitely.
kind of regulations, and you've got to navigate that quite sensitively and build a team around it.
Yeah.
How have you gone about that in
So
terms of hiring talent?
In terms of building a team and hiring, something that I've learned is the more history you have with someone before they join the company, the more likely you'll get through difficult times together. So my co-founder Dave, we used to live together. We were flatmates back in undergrad, 7 years before starting SunDrive. Our very first employee, Peter, I went to high school with. Basically, we were the two South Africans in the year. And yeah, that's, there's a saying that the first 5 people that join the startup, really sets the culture. So that's, just something through my own experience I've found. The more you know someone before they join, the better, or the probability of, having a good long-term relationship for the company, the higher that is.
Maybe you just mentioned South Africa, and that reminded me, if we zoom out, I think there's people here from different backgrounds and different cultures, and we're all we've got global influences with Slovenia for yourself, I think, Niki, and you've got, 5 different cultures in your family. Do you want to talk to that about how that's influenced you, all these global influences, to be the best founder?
Yeah, so growing up, I traveled quite a bit. So I've got 3 younger brothers, all born on different continents. So I was quite fortunate in a way to see a lot of the world, and it also meant changing schools quite frequently and making new friends. But I think, it's very hard to prove this or know for sure, but I think it's made me a little more open to trying things, and I guess maybe also made it a bit easier to adapt to different environments, and starting a company is a very steep learning curve that requires constant adaptation. So I guess maybe that's, again, it's very hard to know for sure, but I think that might have helped.
And Niki, for yourself, I know you're a big reader. You have your 6 a.m. reading sessions in the morning. Tell us about what are some of the cultures you've been most influenced by in the last 2 years?
Last 2 years, I do find China fascinating, and how the government plans for the long term, how China built, high-speed rail infrastructure when other countries couldn't, repair a bridge for the same amount of money, and in half the time. So I think that Chinese culture, and particularly in technology, began with a sort of like, oh, let's take something out there and make it for the Chinese market, or take something out there and make a cheaper version of it. And I think probably about 5 years ago, that dramatically changed to the sources of original new ideas were more likely to come from China, especially in the consumer. I'd say, Facebook copies ByteDance more than the other way around. And so, to me, that's a fascinating country that has produced an increasing amount of original ideas and technical breakthroughs and so on. So I'd say, I'm fascinated with how sort of China works from a operational level, not a political philosophy level, but like how do you get things done in a government? Because I think we've been shown the opposite in terms of efficiency with some of the Western governments in recent times.
I think that's a good segue into solar and climate, Vince. And I did some reading prior to this to just learn a few things. I'm not nowhere near the level of knowledge you've got, but I did read that China has a lot of leadership that they've demonstrated in solar. How do you see, again, to use ambition as the sort of common theme here, how does Australia take advantage of that? In your view, how does Australia become the leader in solar?
Sure. So yeah, we definitely do see that Australia has the potential to be a solar manufacturing powerhouse. We have the need. Australia has the fastest growing rooftop solar market in the world, and Australia is likely going to be home to the 5 largest solar farms by the end of this decade. We have the people. Many of the world's top solar executives, scientists, engineers were trained in Australia. We have the ability. I mentioned earlier, UNSW, basically Australia invented today's commercial solar technology, and Australia has held the world record efficiency for 30 of the last 40 years. Australia has the best resources in the ground. Australia is in the top 3 global reserves for every major mineral that's required to make a solar panel, which no other country can say. And yeah, we just see that Australia has the biggest opportunity of any country, not just to get to net zero, but then to help other countries get to net zero. It is the sunniest continent in the world. It is an extremely large landmass, a very low population density. So we just see Australia has a lot of the ingredients needed to get to this net zero world. And obviously, one very important consideration is like manufacturing and manufacturing costs. So 10 years ago, the costs of solar manufacturing were dominated by labor, by land, and by equipment. And due to the rapid advances in automation, costs are now being dominated by more fundamental costs, like material input, electricity, and transportation. And the cost of solar in the last 18 months has actually gone up by 50% due to fluctuations in each one of those 3 fundamental costs. So basically the solar industry is already in the realm of being directly influenced by those 3 costs. And Australia has a unique advantage in each one of those costs. So I mentioned earlier about materials. Australia is in the top 3 global reserves for every mineral needed. From an electricity perspective, I have a very firm belief that in a net zero world, a lot of the heavy industry and manufacturing is going to occur in countries not where fossil fuel electricity is cheap, but where clean electricity is cheap. And with Australia's vast abundance of renewable energy, Australia basically wins hands down in a net zero world when it comes to producing cheap, clean electricity. And then from a transportation perspective, if you're in Australia and you buy a solar panel from overseas, about 15% of the cost is just to get it to Australia. And obviously with onshore manufacturing, you get rid of that transportation costs. And the reason why the transportation cost is so high is it comes down to the weight of the aluminium framing. That's basically around the perimeter of a solar panel, and also the glass. And the 2 raw minerals that are needed to make aluminium and glass, so for aluminium it's bauxite, and Australia is the largest exporter of bauxite, and for glass it's silica, and Australia is the 2nd largest exporter of silica. So as the industry grows and progresses, the costs of manufacturing are going to get more and more dominated by these fundamental costs. And in that world, the proposition of manufacturing in Australia, just gets better and better.
Super interesting. Niki, anything to add to that?
No, I was going to say that there is a question. I heard that Blackbird invested team, how do you identify the best people to invest in? I think that answer showcases the thoughts around, is it a good idea? How do you determine if something is a good idea? And I think that is the definition as Vince walked through the solar industry market dynamics, and then he then gets onto the SunDrive product around copper being cheaper and better. And I think the definition of a good idea is actually the more you ask, the more interesting, the more fascinating, the more you can credibly answer the question of why would you try to make a solar panel in Australia, which is fundamentally the sort of idea behind SunDrive, and I think that's a great case study example of a good answer of a good idea.
I might actually just share. So I think Niki's kind of sort of explaining sort of how does Blackbird assess their investments and things like that. I might also share sort of from the other side. So there's really...
Be candid.
Yeah, here we go. I mean, this is all about investor-founder relationships. So when we were raising our seed round, so this is in 2018, which is when we closed the round. That's when Blackbird first invested. There's really two things that stood out to myself and my co-founder, Dave. So one is, during the investment process, like when you're fundraising, so I'm sure a lot of founders in the room would have experience or would have witnessed this. There's a lot of signaling or sort of groupthink that tends to happen. So, if one investor gets interested, then another investor will be interested. And, a very common question that gets asked is, who else is interested in your round? And when we were raising our seed round, Niki and Blackbird were the only investor to actually never ask that question. And what that showed, I mean, it's a minor detail, but it actually had quite a profound sort of influence on myself and Dave. I think that just shows, Niki and Blackbird are independent thinkers that have high conviction. And yeah, I think a lot of the top investors, around the world, they have that very similar trait, independent thinking with high conviction. And then the other thing that kind of stood out, which is kind of, it's related to the title of this talk, The Hungry, Not the Proven. So the solar industry is one industry that's, I need to choose the right words here, is very heavily influenced by academics and professionals. And during that seed round fundraising process, I definitely did feel there was a expectation that there would be a professor walking through the door. At the time, I dropped out of my PhD. SunDrive is the first company I founded. I have no prior business experience. At the time, it was 3 of us operating in a tent, making tiny little lab-sized cells with an unknown efficiency. So on paper, we would have been the least qualified to be doing what we're doing. And yeah, really, fast forward to the end of last year, we're very proud to say that we made the world's most efficient commercial size solar cell. And just to put a bit of context on that, at the time when we made this world record efficiency solar cell, we had a team size, team size of around 11. The company that had the previous world record solar cell efficiency is this huge overseas manufacturer with a headcount of about 50,000, wow. A dedicated R&D annual budget of about $1 billion. So yeah, we're very proud as a startup to achieve something like that, and I think that's also proud to sort of be a reflection of the hungry, not the proven, which is part of Blackbird's philosophy.
I think also the authentic focus on the mission. A lot of startups sort of focus on PR and so on and so forth. And when this world record came about, the biographer of Elon Musk, Ashley Vance, who works for Bloomberg, got in touch. Is like, Vince, can I write this profile of the developments? And Vince was like, do you know this guy? Like, is he any good? Do you think it's worthwhile, speaking to him? It's like, yeah, he wrote Elon's biography.
Niki, we've got a minute left. The stopwatch is counting down. Speaking of PR, let's talk about Twitter. There's a lot of questions, not about Twitter as in Elon Musk, about your Twitter usage, around your memes. There's a lot of questions around, plan them out.
It's entirely random at entirely random times.
So you don't schedule your posts for the next 2 weeks?
Well, I think it's, and I don't pay anyone to do my Twitter account either. That was a question from someone previously. But I don't know, Twitter has changed. Used to Twitter, you follow people, you read the people that you follow's tweets, and that's it. And Twitter, maybe like, I don't know, a year ago, I noticed like they would publish tweets of people that I wasn't following, and they would do these meme videos, and I saw the video. I'd think of like some startup-related meme, and I'd reshare the video and write the meme title, and then everyone, those are the most popular tweets. So I just sort of leaned into it, and I think also just again, like no one wants the expert at the top of the hill with the perfect answers to everything, and I think it's also important to again create a personality that it's like you want to have fun. Life is don't take life too seriously. It's a mess in the beginning. Nobody knows anything, the Hollywood saying. All of those things, I think, again, I don't know, that's why I've gravitated to some of the memes.
One last question. There'll be founders in the room who want to contact you after this. Do you want to leave them with 3 tips on how they can get your attention, Niki?
You can just email me, and I'll definitely reply. You'd be surprised at how few do.
48 hours.
But I would just say people like babble, like, oh, can I pick your brain? Like, does anyone want their brain picked? Or like they'll just word vomit, like it's sort of, they didn't have time to write a short letter, so they wrote a long letter. So I think just sort of directly, I think the thing to understand is, I invest for a living. Like the job is to give capital to the interesting people of the world, and that's my job. Like I want to every day wire capital to interesting ideas and interesting people, and so people feel sort of shy about that. It's like no, this is what we're in business for. And so I think just realizing that and describing what you're doing very succinctly. Why is it original? Why is it ambitious? Why should the world work differently? And I think if you can just again, the odds aren't great. I do have to say no 99 times out of 100. But I just think, the 2-paragraph, here's why it's magical, here's why it's ambitious. Those are the emails I dream of. Like I want to get more of those emails.
Do you want to share your 2 shits analogy? I think you shared that recently on a podcast.
Yeah.
Do you want to share that?
So the 2 shits are, why do you give a shit, and do you get shit done? The why do you give a shit, again, it's that connection to the problem. I think you've seen, again, like a wonderful case study in Vince of his connection to the problem, to how the solar market has evolved, to the next leap forward needed to bring solar to a majority of our electricity generation. So that connection to the problem. Then, do you get shit done? Most people are smart but don't do anything. Most people complain, oh, I don't have enough money, oh, the government is blah, I need to do this first before I do the actual thing. And so I think the can you get shit done is just, do you just go and do it? Do you go and do it in your garage? Do you buy the $200 tent from Bunnings? Or do you talk about doing it? And so, that is my sort of quick tests of, it's not the founder, the product, the idea. That's like the generic conference kind of, what do we look for? It's actually those connections between the circles, or the connection between the founder and the market that is most important to me. And then secondly, is the person going to do something or talk about something?
Vince, last word from you. How do people get in touch with you if they want to work at SunDrive?
So we've actually got a whole bunch of roles that have basically just been opened. So from like mechatronic to robotic engineers to we're now sort of building out our leadership team. So head of operations, head of people. So all of those positions are on our website. So yeah, if there is anyone interested that wants to be part of the team creating the solar cells that the world is going to need, then we'd absolutely love to hear from you. Awesome.
Well, that's the finish. I think Niki and Vince will be around for a chat outside, I imagine. But thank you all so much for joining us, and a big round of applause for Niki and Vince.
Thank you.